everybody. Very excited to jump in today. My name's Alana. I am a customer success manager here at Athena. I have the pleasure of working very closely with our three panelists who are joining us today. I will have them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before we jump in, I just want to say first, welcome to our webinar. Excited to spend the next hour with you. And I also wanted to let you know that I will make this slightly interactive. Thank you to everyone already for putting your emojis in the chat. We will ask a couple questions along the way, encourage you to use the chat to answer those. And I may ask you to come off mute and share a little bit more about your answer. If you don't want to, that's completely fine. Just put a little asterisk next to your response and we'll make sure not to call on you. But with that said, just to give you a little peek at what we are going to talk through today and what the agenda looks like, we're going to kick off with some intros so you get to know our panelists. Then we will jump into an engagement strategy discussion, which is kind of the meat of why you're probably all here today. And then from there, we will go into Q&A and wrap up. So to kick things off, I would love to start with some intros just so you get a chance to know who our panelists are joining us today. If you don't mind going around, Irene, we'll start with you. Would love to just hear a little bit more about your company, where you're joining us from, a little bit about how large your company is, and then kind of just in general terms, how your compliance training is designed today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Irene. I am the Associate General Counsel of Employment at Marqeta, and I also lead our people operations function. Marqeta is a B2B fintech in the payment space. We have approximately 800 employees throughout the United States and then growing kind of employee bases in the UK and Poland and Canada. So it's a bit about Marqeta. In terms of our training, we provide anti-harassment training through Athena, both the US content and the non-US content. We also use their LMS to provide kind of broad-based compliance training. So anti-money laundering, code of conduct, conflict of interest, privacy. I will not bore you with the rest, but a whole host of trainings. And we also recently rolled out Athena's DEI training and are currently working on customizing their Manager Essentials training.
Thank you so much, Irene. I will pass it over to Sarah to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I am one of a few senior compliance specialists at Pinterest, and I've been at the company for about 3.5 years. I'm based in the Bay Area, and I oversee a few programs that are part of our overall compliance program. Policy management, conflict of interest, and compliance training is a big one that I oversee. As a company, Pinterest has about 4,000 employees. It's headquartered in San Francisco, but there are employees around the world. I've got teammates in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Dublin, Ireland. And Pinterest's mission is to bring everyone the inspiration to create a life they love. And my compliance work happens in that context. So as we're advancing a mission to create a positive and inspiring place on the internet, it's not just what we do that matters, but how we do it. And so we use that to inform our compliance programs and training. And so for that training, we train new hires on a suite of things when they first join, our code of conduct and key related topics and policies. And for all employees, we have sort of a 2-year cycle where in 1 year, we have a core package of training that includes the code and related policies to refresh and enhance understanding of those expectations. And then in year 2, we train on any topics that have annual requirements, and we're continually reviewing and picking timely topical training. So we think about what in this year will support our employees to address the requirements, work, and risks that they're navigating at that particular point in time.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Matt, do you want to round it out?
Sure. Thank you, Alana. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Lenda. I'm the Learning and Development Program Manager at Upwork and have been with Upwork for about 3.5 years now. I'm working fully remote. I'm based in Jacksonville, Florida, but we are headquartered in San Francisco and have an office in Chicago. Upwork is the world's work marketplace that connects businesses with independent talent from across the globe. So we serve everyone from one-person startups to large Fortune 100 enterprises with a powerful trust-driven platform that enables companies and talent to work together in new ways that unlock their potential. So we internally have about 2,500 employees, so right between Irene and Sarah here. And we require the majority of our workforce to complete anti-money laundering, cybersecurity awareness, data and privacy, and sexual harassment compliance. We do have a hybrid model of work as well, so full-time corporate employees and a hybrid employee population with about 800 folks located in the United States. So that means about 1,700 global employees. In addition to Athena's compliance training as well, we use Athena's LMS tool for our in-house built required and non-required trainings. So we do a lot of obviously onboarding training with our new employees to have the compliance training, but as well, we do a lot of departmental onboarding trainings as well that really give new employees, number one, the tips and tricks that they need to hit the ground running in a super simple one single tool of record. Athena versus having multiple tools. And then as well thereafter annually having our completion of annual compliance trainings depending on location, which obviously Athena makes that very easy for us to do. That's me.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thanks to all of you. As you can see, just across those intros, we have a lot of overlap and similarities across the ways that you run your compliance programs and a lot of differences. So I think it's going to be really valuable as we dive into conversation here. So before we get into questions, I wanted to start with a pulse question across everyone. So feel free to put your answer in the chat. Question here. I have never had an employee lament, grumble, or otherwise complain about training. So please put in a 1 if that's totally true and like you've never gotten a complaint before and everything's perfect. And put a 5 in if that is completely not true and you do find that you are potentially navigating some sort of input on the grumbly side. Chat is firing off. I'm seeing a lot of 5s. I saw 10. I saw like something upwards of 5 million. I love it. Kara or Kara, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, says 1 equals a lie, LOL. Excellent. So it sounds like there's a lot of commonality here. We kind of expect this to be the case. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having a webinar on this and you wouldn't be interested in this topic at all. So thank you for validating this conversation. Sarah, Matt, Irene, sounds like this is fairly common for you as well, would you say? Yeah.
1,000%.
Yeah, sounds about right. Okay, great.
During training season, I'll have meetings with people and they'll be like, oh no, I'm meeting with Sarah. I haven't done my training yet. And that's just a wild effect to have on people like, oh, have you done your training?
I'm that person in the company.
I have a feeling that many people on this call are that person at the company too. Excellent. So let's jump into it. To kick things off, I want to kind of hone in on this challenge just a little bit more. And I want to open the first question to our panelists. So when planning your compliance strategy, what do most people get wrong? What are kind of like the flops in planning compliance strategy? And if anyone is particularly eager, feel free to come off mute. Otherwise, I can ask somebody to kick us off.
I'm happy to kick it off.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so for me, I think what most people get wrong is that they view compliance training as just another box to check off rather than an integral part of the company's culture and risk management strategy. So to me, I think this approach can lead to low engagement and retention, the flop, right? As employees see it as a tedious task rather than a meaningful activity and continuous beneficial learning. I know at Upwork, we have a strong learning culture. And so this training is part of that, strong learning culture to keep that on the up and up. So that's for me.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. It's about the comms for me. So getting all of that right. So not only including the why, but having a why that doesn't fall flat. And with compliance training, it's really easy to default to because it's required by law. But that, falls flat for a host of reasons. One, it's typically not 100% accurate. For example, with anti-harassment training, only a handful of states require it, others encourage it. Employees don't care what the employer is required to do. So it's about finding a why that resonates with your workforce. So when I think, for example, about anti-harassment training, that's sort of the floor of building a culture where everyone feels like they belong. And if you kind of even double click on that, when everyone feels like they belong, there's more productivity, more diverse points of view, leads to better outcomes, and especially in tech, where most employees are a shareholder, it gets to their own bottom line. So there's many different ways to say that, but actually being honest about the why and tying it to your culture and putting that front and center on your comms, other than it's this time of year again, check that box, as Matt shared, I think is incredibly important.
Completely agree, Erin. I think you said that so well. Sarah, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Matt and Irene hit it there of the why and articulating that, having clarity of what you're asking people to do and why, so that you're not lost in the sea of this is confusing, it's boring, it's so long, do I have to take this again? And just tuning out, grabbing their attention with both the call to action and the communications and in the content itself, I think are two really important areas.
Completely agree. And I think like when we're distilling what all three of you are saying into buckets, that's a lot of the challenge that we see across our customers at Athena. So we find that these kind of like fall into three major buckets around where things flop. A lot around like the rollout strategy. So thinking two comms and thinking about like the check the box versus like what is actually happening within somebody's workflow or what's happening at the broader company at that time that might be conflicting. Thinking about rollout strategy, engagement. So training not feeling super engaging, not to Irene's point, feeling like aligned to company values. So people not feeling like they have like even a sense why they should care about this beyond the fact that it's required. And then also like challenges around completion, people not completing because of the aforementioned reasons, because they don't feel like it aligns, or maybe it doesn't feel like it's engaging whatsoever, or they feel like there's too much going on and they don't feel invested to jump in further. So we'll kind of use these buckets as a little bit of a structure just to give you like a sneak peek of what's to come. And digging in a little bit deeper with Irene, Sarah, and Matt in just a minute. Before we go there, one more pulse question from the audience. Would love to know. If you're thinking about this sentence, every single compliance training rollout I've done in exactly the same way. If that is totally true, you always follow like the exact same roadmap or the same playbook for your rollout strategy year over year, company to company. Put a one. If that's totally not true and you do things a little differently or very differently, depending on the context, go all the way to 5. Again, this is a 5 heavy situation. Though I am seeing some 3s too, which is really interesting. And I think maybe that speaks to the fact that like there are, areas where you're just like tweaking or evolving as you're getting closer and closer to something that's landing year over year with a given audience. But in general, I guess I've seen no ones here. So it sounds like no one's doing the exact same thing every single time. And I think what's interesting about this is that optimizing your training strategy and, to the point of this conversation, overburdening your employees or working to not overburden your employees is definitely not a one size fits all solution. It's going to be different for every single company, every culture, every size. And like even that will just not stay stagnant over time. Things will change, culture will change, the size of your company will change. So this is more about kind of evolution and understanding what's right for your particular organization at any given time. And I think we'll find like even in just hearing some snippets from Irene, Sarah, and Matt, there already are differences that we're seeing across these very different organizations. So my hope is that in kind of what you're taking away from this conversation, you think about like what works best for you versus like what is like the, golden solution that will work for absolutely everything. Because unfortunately, though we wish that were true, that is maybe not the case. And I guess kind of like to illustrate that point, like, I don't know, Sarah, if you were working, if you did like the same strategy that you have for Pinterest at a 200-person company, like, do you think that would go over well?
Parts of it. I think like you said, there are things that we're leaning into that aren't changing dramatically year over year and that are applicable for a company of 100 people as opposed to a company of a couple thousand people where we want inclusive, engaging, relevant training. I think that's consistent regardless of size. But tailoring and targeting and scalability are very important. And I'm one person, my team is not massive, but by partnering with others, whether that's managers, org leadership, HR, or using tooling and resources, I can balance like training at scale and automation where possible. So I can click and send a notification to thousands of people, but we can still balance that with effectively and like not losing the humanity to it too, where there's still that personal touch and it's not just, hey, this is a completely robotic notification. We can still acknowledge through a manager, hey, I know what's going on with this team. We can still engage folks to be taking and completing their training. So we're still able to reach that wide audience, but support that more individualized accountability for getting it done.
I love that. That's really, really nice. And I think to that point, Sarah, like there will be threads in all of this that will probably apply across the board. So that'll be really interesting to be able to pull out across the conversation. Cool. Well, let's get into it. Let's start talking about these 3 buckets that we talked through earlier, the designing rollout strategy being the first. And I know that you have all taken very different approaches when it comes to your rollout strategy. So excited to get a little more detail in terms of what each of you has chosen and why. So actually, Sarah, to start out with you, I know that you chose an all-at-once rollout cadence at Pinterest. And I was curious kind of like how you landed on that and what made it feel like it worked for you. And yeah, would you do it again? Yes.
Sure. So on the employee experience side, we were thinking about aligning start dates and our deadline within our larger company calendar. So it's a needle that we're always trying to thread between performance review cycles and end of quarter and holiday seasons, thinking about both when we're launching and when we're asking people to complete something by. And with that, we're also balancing asks of both employees and of managers. So if someone's chasing down training and needing to write a bunch of performance reviews at the same time, that's not an ideal experience. And we're trying to avoid that. In addition, just sort of managing training fatigue of if you're hearing from us every month, it's a lot. And we're just recognizing that teams will know their schedule best. So we give them a set period of time. We say, you can hunker down and do this in one session. You can break it up across the training period. But most of our folks that we've seen tend to do their training in 1 or 2 sittings. And so whether the course is 12 minutes long or an hour long, they tend to hunker down and just get it done. And so that's been informing our engagement strategies and communications to try and set folks up. Also, just on the admin side for me, chasing people once in a big batch, I can find a lot more efficiencies and work with leaders to also find efficiencies for them too. If it's one push, one concerted effort, I think there's also some sort of momentum that you might feel of like everyone's training together and we can compete with our neighbors and have that sort of concentrated effort at the same time. Would I do it again? It's a question we're definitely always looking at and iterating on with each rollout. But I think the key for us is having conversations with all of our partners really early on to align on what is that best timing, how can we set expectations early.
Totally, yeah. And I know something, Sarah, that I loved as you called it kind of like a choose your own adventure, when you rolled it out at once, or you said, okay, we're rolling it out at this time to everyone, choose your own adventure. You decide which courses you want to do, in what order, when you want to do it. Like, we're putting the responsibility and the trust in you as an employee, and then you get to decide, as long as it's within this deadline, when you complete it by. So
Exactly.
curious, like, how did that land with employees?
It, I think, landed. There was good feedback of, I appreciated that I had the reins, I had the control, and I could prepare. Like, I knew I was going to go on leave, or I knew this was a particularly busy season for my team, or we had this particular deadline that you may not have known about, but I did, so I could plan accordingly. So I think that did resonate.
Totally. And spoiler alert that your completion rates were very high. So I think it landed in the data too. Matt, I'd love to move over to you because you did something that's a little bit more of like a hybrid between the all at once and the batch rollouts. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did and how it worked for you?
Yeah, sure. So we at Upwork, we actually went from an all-at-once model to kind of a batched rollout, but we also still have this hybrid model right now. So just to kind of describe my role a little bit more, on top of compliance, I also lead our onboarding as well as performance management functions. And so to Sarah's point, going through those major milestones throughout the calendar year in the company for those specific programs, trying to find times that are working in that. So, what we found with this hybrid approach for training cadence is, we require all of our new team members that are joining us to complete all 4 of our compliance trainings within their first 30 days. Gets it off their dashboard, number one, to complete right away. But typically, their first few weeks are a little more quiet. And so they do have more attention to it, but it also really sets the tone that shows that our requirement is, serious here at Upwork. We all need to complete this within this first time. And if not, then, I essentially come knocking on their doors and say, please complete this. This is important. After that first year, though, that calendar year, then they go into our batched kind of process or batch rollout. So we do quarterly trainings thereafter. So typically we'll have one single training, 1 quarter. We have all 4 for the remainder of the year. We give 60-day training periods because really what we've found with our specific calendar is the end of that 60 days is really that slow part of the quarter. It's the mid part of the quarter. So it's not like at the very beginning you're kicking things off. It's not at the very end when you're trying to do your crunches. It's right in that sweet spot, but it also gives me an extra 30 days to do chasing for the end of that quarter if I need to. But to Sarah's point previously, like, it's much easier to do it all at once with one large group of folks than various times throughout the year. So we're honestly, it's kind of a test right now. I want to see how this, really goes. Like, I am only familiar with the all at once. So trying this new quarterly so far, it feels like it's been taken very well by our employee base, but I'm open to, changing that potentially in the future too, if we were to get feedback. But so far, it's been great feedback. If you're sitting down and taking a 30-minute training once a quarter instead of 3 or 4 hours all at once, it's a lot nicer, number one, but number two, it doesn't lead for me to have the entire month of December chasing people to get year-end compliance rating in, right? So I also want to take time off at the end of the year. So it makes everyone's lives easier, I think.
I'm definitely hearing the theme of thinking about when the deadline is and when that buffer window is after the deadline and the chasing that will need to be done, and almost planning that into the rollout as well.
Really, that's a major part. I mean, admin work is just as much part of the process as the actual completion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Irene, I know you've been more on the batch rollout cadence. Very curious to hear from you. So why did you choose this direction? And then to your kind of comms point earlier in your intro, how did you communicate to this team? And what's unique about Marqeta culture that you wanted to keep in mind when designing the strategy?
Yeah, so we have a lot of training. As a fintech company, we do a lot of training on regulations that apply to our customers. As a public company, we provide training on insider trading and kind of all host of topics relevant to being a public company. And we have an incredible learning and development team that rolls out a bunch of skill-based training. So we are always, in addition to the annual cycle and other company moments, are also trying to ensure that we don't overburden folks with training. So the batch lets us do that. We do the new hire training kind of for everybody, which sounds similar to both Sarah and Matt. I agree. It's sort of a quiet time, a nice time for people to ramp up, show the importance of it. And then for other trainings, we look at like the role, like our compliance training is based on the role that someone holds and sort of has like compliance and compliance 2.0 for roles that operate sort of more in the payment space and are working directly with customers. And so we sort of look at how we best capitalize folks' time and ensure that we're not overburdening them with training, and have found batched to work really well. When we onboarded Athena, also, we were moving from an all at once training with another provider and got not the best feedback about our prior training. And so also we're very thoughtful about not doing a all-in-ones again, recognizing that they'd done training that had fallen flat. So the trigger really for us onboarding Athena was like, if we're going to make people do it, especially new hires where you're like setting the stage, the content has to be good. Like, so that was sort of also a part of our strategy.
Yeah, very, very important. And I really like this piece too that I just want to highlight around like targeted training, because it sounds like not everyone gets all training. Like some populations get certain training. Is that like based on risk profile? Is it based on like how much they're engaging with specific content? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, thankfully at leading the people operations team, I also kind of own Workday, and so can look at all of our different groups and how we can batch them, and work very closely with the Athena team on setting up an integration that aligned with job duties and job profiles and job families, especially around compliance. Because I think a lot of companies default to like everybody needs everything compliance related. And some topics I think definitely fall in that camp, like privacy. Like everybody at some point is touching confidential company information from even just going to a town hall. But other things that are more like anti-money laundering is less applicable to some roles. So we really break it down by job family to make sure that the content stays relevant.
That's great. And is that something that like you said at once, or does that like end up evolving over time?
For now, we've said it once, but it was built into the integration with Athena. So that's like the incredible part, is that it is just set it and forget it. And where previously we were attempted to do this, but it was like very manual by like sending out trainings, which would not be possible at companies the size of Pinterest or Upwork, but we were able to automate it, which makes it even more sort of applicable.
We're hoping to take as much off your plate as possible, because we know even with like the baseline, there's a whole lot of admin work involved.
And even on the kind of chasing piece, like the tracking capabilities within Athena make it very easy. And in some ways you do the tracing for us with like weekly nudges in Slack. Like I find all the things that Athena offers also limit the number of chasing amount that I've had to do previously. Pre the Athena days.
That. We've gotten a lot of feedback from customers over the year. If there are other customers on this call, please continue to keep the feedback coming. Keep making life easier for you. Excellent. Well, thank you all. And again, too, similarities here, some differences, and I'm also hearing a lot about experimentation, and hearing feedback from employees, and then kind of iterating on strategy over time, which is really great. So let's start talking a little bit more about engagement. And I know there are a lot of different ways that we can keep training engaging to employees, from the content to the ways in which we're rolling it out, to the topics that we even decide to roll out in the first place. So again, I'm gonna start with you, Sarah, if you don't mind. And I want to first start by talking about custom training, because I think Pinterest has done something really innovative in the ways in which you've leveraged custom training through Athena, to make your training sound like it's designed for pinners. So I wanted to just ask you if you can tell us a little bit more about why custom content is so important, maybe even give like a very quick intro to like what you've done to customize training, and how it resonates for learners.
Sure thing. Just one clarification, pinners are how we refer to our users. We've got pinployees and always here for a pun.
Love it. Love it. Great.
Yeah, we've definitely made a concerted effort to build in the look and feel and policies and resources directly from Pinterest. And that'll be with like really explicit reference to our company values, with a little more explanation of like what a particular point of contact, who that team is and what they do and how they can support, or really specific examples. I think Athena does a really great job in their content of fleshing out examples of how these concepts might look in a particular workplace. I think we just go one step further and say, and here's how that looks here. Here's how that looks in your day to day. And it really just brings those concepts to life. I think it makes it really relatable. It's memorable, so that folks don't have to dig around and find like, hey, there was vague reference to like talk to this person or find this resource. We can have it right there. And so everything's consolidated in one place. I think we also mirror this with our company policy structure, where we'll have our overarching policy document, but we have a lot of FAQs and scenarios to really bring those asks and those obligations and reminders to life so that it's more relevant and engaging for folks. I also think, just personally, referencing your organization versus Pinterest and exactly what's happening here goes a really long way. So it feels like someone is talking to you and not referencing, oh, that classic anti-bribery example of someone with a suitcase full of cash, where for me and my job sitting at my computer here in Mountain View, that doesn't really mean anything to me. So yeah, those
Really, it doesn't?
examples, that nuance, and really being able to call out specific company resources, whether it's stuff from our inclusion and diversity team, more specific people resources. We have specific ways that we do certain things. And so being able to really clearly call that out is something that I'm really grateful we've been able to do.
That's really awesome. And I'm actually just personally curious about this. Was that as a result of like employees saying like, we want this to feel relatable? Is that just like kind of baked into Pinterest culture? Like kind of like where does that arise from?
Yeah, I think it's both. We definitely get feedback saying, and we've gotten really positive feedback saying these examples make a lot of sense, or I hadn't thought about it. And I'm really glad that you brought up this concept in this way. Also, just aligning the tone and the style and the level of specificity with other company communications and training. So it feels really cohesive. And I think that's just a general sort of cultural approach of, can we be pithy where possible? I'm not the greatest writer, but we have people on the team that are, and being able to align that voice with the Athena content has been really great to just show people how this directly relates to their work. And I think one of my favorite quotes that we got in some of our feedback was, compared to other trainings I've taken, this is not only informative, but feels genuine. And I think that was really helpful to hear.
Yeah, that's really validating after all the work that you put into it too. That's
It
great.
doesn't suck either.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like the tone of like, this is not just an isolated thing, our compliance training, but it's part of like this broader brand of how we communicate and how we talk about culture at Pinterest. I think that's really nice. Excellent. So in that same vein, Irene, I know you're going to be doing a little bit of customization of your manager training a little bit later this year. And I'm kind of curious, like, I know there are some courses that just like worked exactly out of the box from Athena, and others where it felt more important to have a little bit of a custom touch. How did you decide that? And like, why was that important to you specifically for that training?
Yeah, I'll start by sharing sort of the ways in which we're customizing, which I think will answer that question. So the Manager Essentials training is sort of what I think of as like law school for people managers plus some. So as an employment lawyer, I love it. It's my favorite training. And so we kind of are doing three things to customize it. And we haven't rolled this out, but I feel confident that this will lead to high engagement. The first one is we're going to have kind of a message from our CAO at the beginning that goes to like, why is this important? Which is that, you know, employees leave managers, not companies. Typically, managers also determine like how happy the employee is, how engaged they are. So really like reiterating the why we're asking you to do this at the beginning from an executive, I think sets like the tone of why it matters. Then we're being really selective about the modules. So some of the modules have some similar content to things released by our learning and development team. So effective feedback, things where we want to be thoughtful about people's time, going back to don't over train. So super easy to select which modules as part of the customization. And then my favorite piece is actually being able to layer on Marqeta policies, like similar to what Sarah described. So an example is the Athena leave of absence module does like a great foundation on the FMLA, job protection, anti-retaliation, what type of leaves are covered, like things that I want my people managers to know. But there are some pieces that are less applicable. For example, FMLA is unpaid, but like many tech companies, we provide compensation for certain leave types. So that would be confusing to our managers if we weren't able to explain that. Same thing with tenure for eligibility. FMLA has a tenure requirement, we don't. So it allows us to actually change the content to be applicable to not just what the law requires, but like how it works at Marqeta, and then provide kind of tactical resources. So if your employee reaches out to you and needs to go on a leave, here's what they do, here's who they contact, here's the policy, here's how long it can be. And it really sort of grounds the manager in what they need to know in their role. So being able to customize in all of those ways, I think will be kind of incredibly informative for our people managers and mitigate risk, which for me, again, as the employment lawyer, care deeply about.
Totally. Yeah. Because that's the piece that you're also balancing, right? It's like, how do we make it easier on us? How do we make it easier on learners? And then how do we also like make sure that we're protecting the risk of our company? Yeah, that's great. And that definitely does answer my question in like all of the different like spokes of the ways in which that both supports engagement, but also like very direct action from employees, which I think is great. And I know there's another piece here, and I did add a little piece of this slide around kind of like the types of topics that you end up delivering because of feedback from employees. And I know you got some feedback from your ERGs to do DEI specific training. So I was kind of curious if you could tell us a little bit more about like thinking about training engagement from the perspective of learner employee feedback.
Yeah, so one of our ERGs requested that we provide DEI training as a kind of a measure to support building a culture of inclusion and belonging. And so the Athena content was kind of spot on. Like when I think of anti-harassment training, I think of like the floor, what's prohibited, although Athena content goes above and beyond that, but it still goes through, a lot of what is prohibited. And the DEI training is actually about how you build this culture that matters to Marqeta. So best practices for an inclusive environment, how to be mindful about implicit bias, how to be mindful about microaggression. So it was a nice way to be able to deliver on an ask without needing to do as much customization or building net new training. That being said, we were thoughtful about the customization in the way that we were with Managers Essentials, where we selected the modules that most closely aligned with that. So the ones that I mentioned are really the ones we rolled out, and also sort of saved time as opposed to the whole DEI training. We were able to condense it. Another component of it is that we're rolling it out on a month by month basis. So at the start of every month, employees get 10 or less minutes of training, which is like a module. So it's not so much, it's not a huge ask, and it shows like a commitment to continuous learning in the space. Like it's not a check the box. This is like something that you should be mindful of in your day-to-day workflow. And so having a ping that is only an ask of 10 minutes once a month wasn't a heavy burden. I checked this morning, I think our completion rates are around like 26%. We're 2 weeks in, so like halfway through the deadline. And the training is non-mandatory, just highly sort of encouraged. So I think people are incredibly receptive, and we're incredibly grateful to our ERGs for putting it on our roadmap.
That's awesome. And that's a really high completion rate for non-mandatory training. Just,
Early, I mean, I think it's going to double by, I'm gonna jinx myself, but by that first deadline.
Totally. Yeah. That's really, really great. Thank you, Irene. Matt, another element to add in here is policy attestations. And I know Upwork leverages policy attestations pretty frequently in training. And I am curious to hear like how you decided to include them, how you include them, and like how you're thinking about that in terms of engagement and not overburdening your employees.
Yeah, that's a great question, Alana. I think being a public company, many times we do have external auditors that do carry out audits for us as well, right? And so there are requirements that come along with, have employees been trained on specific topics. And so I think in order for us to leverage, an extra level of maybe security to say like, yes, they really have done it, we will add on policy attestation. So our trainings that require attestations have, really been specifically requested by the area stakeholders. So let's take cybersecurity awareness, for example. I work closely with our InfoSec team. They're my stakeholder that will review the content and then we'll suggest, hey, we know we have an audit yearly that requires all employees to attest that they know our policies. So a simple thing that we've been able to do is have employees go through the entire cybersecurity awareness training, and then we just create a one-off extra assignment that says cybersecurity part 2, policy attestation, where it just shows our then policy in order for them to, number one, already have the knowledge of what cybersecurity is from the training, but then a little bit understand more our policies around it, go through the entire policy, sign off, and then we have a double check there essentially to say, yes, not only have they been trained, but they've attested that they've actually reviewed our policies and have a better understanding of that specific policy. We've seen it very helpful. It's very useful.
It's awesome too, because it's just all at once. Like you're assigning them both at the same time instead of like attestation middle of the year, training different time of the year.
Absolutely. And I will say, like, we've tried it before, like on the one-off, like once before, and it's kind of creates confusion for folks. Like, what am I attesting? What is this policy? Like, I can read it and I understand like this, but why now? Like, what? And, really going back to our calendar of events for the year and HR land, like, we want to be very, specific on when this training is coming out. So why not just batch it all together so that it's one single package here, completed? You got this quarter to do it, you're done, and then you can move on with your life.
Yeah, and you can move on with escalations too.
Exactly.
Perfect segue as we talk about high inflation and escalations. I would love to talk about escalation strategy. I am sure that everyone on this call, if you are involved in a compliance program in any way, has had to do some sort of chasing and escalation. As much as we would love for like everything to just land at 100% with no effort, sometimes there is some follow-up required. And I know all three of you have really, really phenomenally high completion year over year. So curious to hear what your success strategies are for actually getting to those high numbers. And I'll kind of like open the floor here to anyone who wants to talk about what strategies worked well for you, maybe like what levers you pull or who you engage in that process. Sarah, maybe you want to kick it off?
Sure, I can kick us off. And I imagine we'll have a lot of iteration on this too. I guess one lever that we use pretty consistently, and both the content and the format are very important, are communications. And so whether that's reminders both to the employee and to their manager, that's a really key focus for us in how we're designing our program. So for direct notifications to employees, we change the verbiage as the training period progresses to really hone in on the why. We'll emphasize wins of, hey, this piece is only 12 minutes, or here's a really important takeaway that you'll learn more about in this particular course. We'll emphasize that we're giving you exactly what you need to meet your requirements for this year. It's tailored to your role. It's very specific to you. Like, know that we've thought about this and it's intentional why you're getting exactly this batch of training. Also, just how we're reaching people. We are reaching them on both email and Slack. So regardless of what system folks are primarily engaging in, it was really important. And we found a lot of success with multiple channels of communication, and just that one click away to get right into the training is really helpful. I think we also create a sense of urgency as the communications continue throughout a training period. So the 1 week to go email has been one of our most effective comms that we've sent out. we see the biggest spike in completion rates right when the training is assigned, with our early birds that jump right on it, the sort of 1 week to go and right at the deadline. So how we very succinctly craft those communications is something that we tend to lean into a lot. I think also for communications, but also it fits into reporting for managers, being able to tag managers in and say, you can see in real time exactly how your team is doing. Here's some tiny draft verbiage for you to pop off to members who still have training left to complete, just removing barriers so that it's that much easier to be following up with people. And I know Athena has even given us some verbiage of what we can use in those situations too, that we'll iterate on as well, which has been really helpful. But yeah, being able to tap organization leaders and say, you've got these people, please help us out. We really appreciate your partnership. But also being able to communicate that well in advance of the deadline has been really helpful.
So giving yourself like a little runway for escalation.
Totally.
Pre-deadline. I love that. Matt, so you
Yeah. Yeah, Sarah, you made a great point about the intentionality there. I think it rings true for me as well, and just maybe Upwork in general. We've really built, again, a strong culture of continuous learning and training throughout the year. So it is really built into our fabric from top down that we're required to complete annual training. And if we don't, it puts the company at risk. So by promoting and involving leadership, the very top, to do these quarterly mentions of completing these short trainings, it really does push employees to complete their training sooner, and honestly requires minimal chasing at the end of the campaign. So for example, we just ended our most recent AML training campaign. So it ended with 93% on-time completion, which is wild in my opinion. This is our second full campaign doing these batch rollouts. So I was very impressed to see that, number one. But when, to Sarah's point, I send an email before the deadline, that's when that boost will come. You have it at the beginning, the week before, and then at the deadline. So after the deadline, after I sent that email for past due folks, it shot up from 93 to 98%. So really it's that 2% left that I needed to follow up with, which for me, working with 2,500 employees, it's much easier to work with 2% versus 10, 12%, right? So again, the top-down approach definitely works when you have that leadership buy-in. It really makes it so much easier.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, like the tone from the top. If you can get that sort of buy-in, then that communication is so powerful. People really respond to leadership. Irene, anything you'd add from the Marqeta standpoint, especially
we do.
highly
We do
regulated?
a little bit. Oh, I'm interrupted. Sorry about that.
No, go ahead. Go right ahead.
I would say we do a little bit of all the above, like tailored comms proactively, really trying to get completion done early, and give people friendly reminders that are tailored to them. We primarily reach out via Slack, which is how most of the company kind of communicates. So we do a little bit of all that's shared. And really, I think getting to the high completion rates has a lot to do with training that doesn't suck. Like if the first Athena training that you take is funny and thought-provoking, like one of my favorite features is like embedded articles to like Harvard Review articles, like things that are actually more than people expect to learn, they're more likely to do their next Athena training. So at its core, I think just shifting to a content that is cringe-free, as good as it gets, really gets us those completion rates.
Like building trust with your employees. Yeah.
And it really is cringe.
There's no suitcase in money in a suitcase content is really the key.
Is that how we should rebrand? No money in a suitcase. Love it. Excellent. Well, I have asked you a lot of questions, so we're going to open it up. Before we do, I just kind of want to flash this in front of all of you. Kind of an attempt to distill a lot of what we've heard across the board from our conversation today. Namely that there are so many different roads to roll out strategies when you're thinking about how to make something that best fits your organization, and that feels the least burdensome as possible to employees. There's this kind of road that includes like all at once training rollout, only what's required, including your homegrown trainings there, including your attestations, having the kind of like set and forget elements to your training. There's this road that's like around targeted training, which speaks to a lot of what Irene was talking about. Like, how do you assign training to the people who need it based on like risk profile or the type of work that they do? To Sarah's point, how do you customize your content to keep it fresh or to make it feel relevant to employees? So thinking about kind of more of that targeted approach. And then kind of down the line, other roads I think that have come up very frequently in conversation are like, what are potential future options for a test out if somebody is already very familiar with some of this content, has already gone through their first new hire training? Is there potential for refreshers for learners who completed their training year over year and maybe might not need the kind of like full scale? Or even like, you know, the model that Irene had spoken to with DEI training, like thinking about smaller bits of content versus the whole thing. And then further down the line, I know there's been a lot of conversation in the space around adaptive learning. So thinking about advanced tracks, how learning might adapt based on your answers, and thinking about the potential for a lot of tech to support some really creative rollout strategies there. So opening it up for Q&A. I know we have a few questions that have already come in. Feel free to drop more in. We'll get to as many as we can before we wrap up here. I see a question here from Lucy. She asks, do your companies have the same training for supervisors and managers, or is it two separate tracks? So curious to hear across anyone if you have any color to fill in there.
I can shed some light from the Upwork side. I know like with our 4 trainings, I think it's dependent on the type of training that we have that would be specific to supervisors if there's additional training. So for example, a sexual harassment training, there is the manager portion. If you live in Illinois or California, it's a little bit longer. Also, those Illinois employees will have the bystander training that is attached to it. And again, it's dependent on the company, the role, and what you require for the supervisors. That's what we do here. That is one thing I do really love about Athena, though, is they take the guesswork out of location. So I don't have to pull a list of all Illinois managers, all Illinois employees, and be sure to assign each of those modules that are specific to them. It's just baked into our Workday instance, pulls over that data, and it assigns accordingly.
Ditto for our situation as well. But yeah, exactly that. Specifically for harassment prevention, we have very specific manager content, and the fact that it's that dynamic where it's really just an add-on of exactly what they need for their role and their location is really, really helpful to have that baked in.
Hey, ditto. We have it both for the anti-harassment as well as some of our compliance training, like I mentioned earlier, that we have some additional training for roles where it's applicable, and those tend to be more senior roles.
Awesome. So it sounds like targeted training across managers and IC is definitely commonality across the board, both for risk and regulatory reasons and training reasons. Great. Really great question from Andy just came in. Do you communicate overall progress by department, like a dashboard or like a competition or gamified approach to the company? And caveats this question, I love it, not to shame, but to drive better engagement.
That's definitely a tool that we've used and that I'm thinking about. Our next big batch rollout will be for 2025. So definitely thinking about how to gamify that, and exactly not to say, hey, look at who's lagging behind, but we've gotten really great leader engagement to say, hey team, we get 2 more people, we're the first ones to 100%. That's been really effective, especially at that executive leader level or that senior leader level, to rally their team to be first.
Anyone else use those? I'm not sure, Irene or Matt. Do you do kind of like progress by department?
I'm thinking about it after Sarah's response and Annie's question.
Honestly, Sam, you have the wheels like turning in my head now. Like that's a great opportunity to number one, get like awareness out, like, hey, we're doing this, but I don't know, I never thought of that. That's a really cool idea.
Awesome. Good learnings across the board. A few other questions. I know we're running up on time, so I just saw some questions. Can we receive the recording for the session? Yes, absolutely. Can you share templates for the reminder completion emails and Slacks with us? Yes, we can also share some templates with you. And I think we'll use the last 4 precious minutes here just to share some takeaways with you. So across the board, we're just going to have our panelists answer this one last question. One is one specific action that folks can take away to make this process easier. Matt, you've been randomly selected to go first in my brain.
Sure. Awesome. No, thanks, Alana. I think for me, to make this process easier, I believe it does really take a strong stakeholder involvement. All right. So number one, top-down leadership buy-in, to promote continuous learning. And number two, I guess part of that continuous, the importance of compliance. But then number two, working with topic-specific stakeholders to support and drive the campaigns from a company-wide perspective, which, ultimately does drive the compliance numbers. If you have someone, in a higher up kind of important role, like it seems pretty, like, okay, I should really get this training done. Jan told me I need to do it, so I need to do it, right? Like, cool. I'm gonna take the initiative now. I've got 30 minutes I can block off and just fully complete it. So again, for me, it's that strong stakeholder involvement.
Jan told you you have to.
Jan told you.
Exactly.
Here first.
Irene, do you want to follow that?
Yeah, I would say make it relevant. And we've talked about a handful of ways of doing it in an applicable time, doing columns that address the why, customizing. Like I think each one of us has attempted various avenues to make it relevant, but that I would say is the gold mine. Start with one and keep on adding on.
I guess one last idea to dovetail with both what Matt and Irene said. If you can, see if you can approach it, try to meet folks where they are. So find out from leaders, get that buy-in, get that support, make it relevant, and get employee feedback so you know where they are and how it's going and how best to meet them. That can be in the content itself. Are you translating it into enough languages to make it accessible to your global audience? If someone's not in this topic day to day, do they see why it's relevant and why they need to sit down and do this training right now? And just generally when employees are sharing their thoughts on their training, I find that not only are they then engaging with the material, but they're helping me improve my compliance program in the long term.
Feedback, so essential. And really nice to hear all of you having spoken today around like how you've iterated your programs with that feedback from learners over time. So I imagine that your compliance programs will maybe even look different 6 months from now or a year from now than they even do today, which is a really nice, just kind of like nod to the creative nature of all of this. So with that being said, we will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here, Irene, Sarah, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone who attended today. So great to have you here. Thank you for your thoughtful participation, for all of the like wall of emojis coming up right now. It's very encouraging. And I hope you all have a really great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.